Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. Factories are supposed to run like clockwork. Machines moving, lights buzzing, workers lost in routine. But on the night shift at Greenfields, something was wrong. The air grew heavier after midnight. Machines came alive when they shouldn't. And in the silence between shifts, strange sounds carried through the metal walls. It was the kind of place that made you question what you were really hearing and whether you were ever truly alone. Would you dare work in a place like this? I first walked into Greenfield's Canning Company in the early 90s. It sat on the edge of a small Midwestern town, surrounded by endless rows of corn that seemed to swallow the horizon. By day, it looked ordinary enough. A long, low building with trucks pulling in and out, the air thick with the smell of tomatoes. But at night, the factory felt cut off from the world. The night shift was small, maybe 6 of us spread across the whole floor. You could go an entire hour without seeing another face, just the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the distant clatter of conveyor belts. Steam hissed from the pipes that lined the ceiling, fogging the air and making every shadow stretch and shift. My routine was simple. Check the vats, monitor the lines, make sure the tomatoes kept moving. The job was repetitive, almost mindless. But it was the silence in between, the long stretches of stillness that wore on you. That's when the building seemed to come alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It started small, things we laughed off at first, a sound here, a smell there, but once you noticed it, you couldn't ignore it. Some nights, when the factory floor went quiet, you could swear you heard it, a scream, not loud, not close, just far enough away to make you question whether it was real. It carried through the steel beams and empty corridors, rising and fading, like someone calling for help deep inside the building. Then came the footprints. Damp, bare footprints appeared near the vats, trailing across the concrete floor. We thought it was a joke, maybe someone from day shift trying to spook us, but the prints never led anywhere. They just stopped. One night, I was checking the tanks when the smell hit me, a sour, rotting stench so strong it burned the back of my throat. I knew the vat was empty, completely drained, but the odor pouring out of it was thick, like spoiled tomatoes left in the sun. And then, at midnight, machines started humming without a hand on them, a conveyor belt rattling to life, a motor kicking on, a light buzzing awake. Each time, we found nothing wrong, no explanation. Most of us brushed it off. We said we were tired, overworked, maybe even paranoid. But deep down, we all felt it. Something wasn't right in that factory, but we are all waiting for who will be the first person to spill the beans. After weeks of strange nights, whispers about the factory's past started circling. Some of the older workers remembered the story, how decades earlier a man had vanished on shift, last seen near one of the cooling tanks and never found again. Management called it an accident, but the body was never recovered. Rumor was he drowned in one of the vats, sealed under gallons of water and pulp. Once you knew that, the noises made more sense, or maybe less. The factory floor grew unpredictable. Motors fired without warning, machines grinding in the dead of night with no operator in sight. We'd hear the belts rattle to life, but when we checked, there was nothing on them. The vats were worse. Sometimes they shook, metal groaning like something heavy was thrashing inside. You'd put your hand on the steel and feel it tremble, even though they were empty. And the smell, the stench of rotten tomatoes, kept growing stronger. It clung to our clothes, followed us home, seeped into our skin. One night, a coworker leaned against the safety rail while checking a tank. Without warning, the rail gave way. He stumbled forward, nearly pitching into the dark vat below. We pulled him back at the last second, his face pale, swearing he'd felt hands push him. That was the breaking point for some. A few handed in their badges and never came back. Others flat out refused to work the night shift. But for those of us who stayed, the nights only got worse. I was doing rounds near the back storage when I noticed something wedged behind a shelf. At first, I thought it was just scrap metal. But when I pulled it free, my hands closed around an old, rusted lunchbox. The hinges groaned as I forced it open. Inside were the remains of a meal long forgotten. Mold-blackened wrappers, a dented thermos. But what stopped me cold was the ID badge, its photo barely visible beneath layers of dust, and a pocket knife, its blade brown with rust. Both belonged to the man who had disappeared all those years ago. The moment I touched them, the factory erupted. Every machine roared to life, grinding and clattering at once. Lights flickered so hard they nearly went out, plunging the floor into strobe-like flashes. The air filled with a deafening scream, long, hollow, and unbroken, echoing from deep inside the vats. I froze as I saw wet, glistening footprints appear across the concrete, one after another, as if someone was walking barefoot just ahead of me. They led straight to the largest tank, and then stopped abruptly at the edge. In the chaos of flashing lights and pounding metal, I saw it, a figure, shadowed and dripping, standing near the rim. Its outline was human, but blurred, distorted, as if water clung to its shape. And then it moved, reaching out, not toward the tank, but toward me, like it meant to drag me in. After that night, the factory was never the same. We kept working, but no one could shake the feeling that something had changed. The walls seemed to hum differently. The shadows stretched longer. Even the air carried a weight you couldn't explain. Management blamed it all on faulty wiring and old machines. They said the power surges triggered the chaos. But the night shift workers knew better. We were there. We heard the screams. We saw the footprints. By morning, the lunchbox was gone. No one admitted to touching it, and no one saw who moved it. It simply vanished. To this day, those who've spent time inside Greenfield swear the factory still remembers. Some claim that when the lines fall silent, a sour, rancid smell creeps back into the air. And if you're unlucky enough to be there at midnight, you might hear it, the pounding, echoing from deep inside the steel tanks. No one knows for sure if the worker's spirit wanted justice, or if he was reaching for someone else to take his place. What do you think really happened that night? Do you believe the worker drowned by accident, or was there something darker behind his disappearance? And tell me this, if you were on that night shift, would you have opened the lunchbox or left it where it was, buried in the dark? Factories are meant to be loud. Machines grinding, metal clanging, voices carrying over the din. But in the quiet hours after midnight at Cedar Point Slaughterhouse, the silence pressed harder than the noise ever could. Workers spoke of sounds that didn't belong, deep, with breaths echoing through the chiller rooms long after the last cattle had been processed. Others claimed they saw movement in places no one should be, shadows weaving between the rows of hanging carcasses, dragging something heavy across the blood-slicked floor. Nothing was ever caught on camera, no alarms ever sounded, and yet, night after night, the feeling remained that someone, or something, was studying them just as closely as they were watching for it. Would you keep working, knowing something waited in the dark? I used to work nights at Cedar Point Slaughterhouse, back in the early 2000s. It sat way out in the middle of nowhere, just a long, low building at the edge of a pine forest that seemed to stretch on forever. The nearest town was a good 30 minutes away, and in winter the roads iced over so bad that sometimes we weren't sure we'd make it back home at all. The place was always lit up like a beacon. Big floodlights buzzing against the dark sky, catching the frost in the air. From the outside it looked almost welcoming, but once you stepped through those heavy steel doors, the smell hit you. Blood, raw meat, bleach. No matter how many showers I took, it never came off my skin. The night crew was small, maybe 6 or 7 of us most nights. By then we'd already worked long hours, so nobody talked much. Everyone just kept their heads down, finishing their part of the shift. The routine was always the same. Run the line, wash everything down, scrub the floors, lock the pens, and close the chillers. When the last animal was gone, you could feel it. The whole building would go quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. The hum of the lights was the loudest thing left, with the occasional drip of a pipe or the squeak of rubber boots on wet concrete. The hallways always seemed longer in that silence, like they stretched on farther than they had during the day. That silence was supposed to mean we were done for the night, but standing there in it, I always had the sense that something was still awake in that building, something waiting for us to notice it. One night, after we'd finished cleaning down the line, I was in the chiller room stacking crates when I heard something move behind me. At first, I thought it was just the hum of the compressors, but then it came again. Low, heavy breaths, almost like the sound an animal makes when it's straining against a pen. It was deep, wet, and wrong. I froze, listening. The room was supposed to be empty. All the cattle were long gone, the floors washed, the drains running clear. Still, the sound carried through the cold air, bouncing off the steel walls. It almost felt like it was coming from every corner at once. When I mentioned it to the others, most of them just shrugged. Pipes, they said. The old machines settling. One guy laughed and told me I'd been working too many nights in a row. I tried to laugh too, but the sound had stuck in my chest. A few nights later, one of the cleaners was mopping near the holding pens. He suddenly stopped and waved us over. Right there in the damp concrete was a footprint. At least, it looked like one. It wasn't human, and it wasn't anything I'd ever seen from an animal. It was large, spread out, like a wolf's paw, except there were 6 long claws, fanned out unnaturally wide. We stood around it, staring. Nobody said much at first. Then the jokes started,
Someone must have carved it in with a tool, or maybe it was a trick of the mop water. But none of us wanted to touch it, and nobody could explain how it pressed so deep into the concrete, like something heavy had been standing there. We laughed it off out loud, but the rest of the night, every sound carried a little sharper. Every drip, every echo of boots on the floor made the hair on my arms stand up. Things didn't stop with the sounds or that print on the floor. They got worse. One night, during cleanup, one of the guys went pale and dropped his mop. He said he'd just seen something move behind the rows of carcasses hanging from the rails. We all went to look, half expecting him to laugh it off, but he didn't. He was shaking. He swore it wasn't a person, said it was too tall, the way it stooped and moved, and that something was dragging behind it, like a thick, heavy tail pulling across the wet floor. A few nights later, another worker was shutting down the cutting line when he caught sight of something in the glass panel of a window, a figure, hunched, long-limbed, standing just over his shoulder like it had been watching. When he spun around, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the hum of the freezers and the swing of the chains holding the beef. What unsettled us most was how clean the evidence was. No alarms ever tripped, no doors opened. Whatever it was, if it was there at all, it moved without leaving a trace. Then came the smell. Not the normal smell of blood and bleach, but something fouler, a wet, musky stink that I can't really put to words. It would come strongest after midnight, clinging to the back of your throat, sticking to your clothes. That's when the joke stopped. Some of the crew refused to walk the halls alone. A few quit outright, saying no paycheck was worth it. And in the break room, the rumors started. Whispers about the old legends, the ones people up north talk about in hushed voices. Wendigos, skinwalkers, things that wear shapes they shouldn't, that hunt when the nights get too long and cold. I wanted to believe it was just stories, but in that building, with the shadows stretching out forever and that smell seeping into everything, it was getting harder to tell myself nothing was there.
I'll never forget the night I stayed late to mop down the holding pens. Everyone else had already clocked out, and the building had that dead stillness I hated, like the air itself was listening. I was halfway through when I heard it, a scrape, sharp and deliberate, like claws dragging across bare concrete. Then came the sound beneath it, low and steady, breathing. Not human breathing, heavier, rougher, like it was being pulled through an animal's chest. The lights overhead flickered once, buzzing. In that brief shadow, something shifted between the carcasses hanging on the rail. I didn't see it well because it was too quick, moving with a weight that made the chains clink and the bodies sway, one after another, as though something massive had brushed through them. I should have left. I knew I should have. But instead I followed the sound, my boots squeaking against the wet floor. The smell hit me first, stronger than it had ever been. Thick, musky, like wet fur left to rot in the cold. At the far end of the room, the steel doors were gouged with fresh marks, deep claw streaks that hadn't been there minutes earlier. I stood frozen, staring at them, when I felt it. That weight in the air, the sense that something was standing behind me. When I turned, I saw it. It was taller than any man I'd ever met, hunched forward, its arms dragging longer than they should have been. A heavy tail cut across the floor, leaving a dark, wet smear behind it. Its shape was wrong, all sharp angles and bending joints,
But what made me choke on my breath were the eyes, faintly glowing, locked on me like it had been waiting for me to see it.
It didn't come for me. It didn't even move. It just stared, studying me the way you might study something caught in a trap. And then it slipped back into the shadows, like it had never been there at all. After that night, Cedar Point was never the same for me. I kept showing up for my shifts, but the building felt different, heavier, like every corner held a pair of eyes. When I finally told management what I'd seen, they brushed it off right away. Said long hours can play tricks on the mind, that fatigue makes shadows feel alive. To them, it was nothing more than paranoia, or maybe a prank that got carried too far. But the rest of us knew better. The smell alone was enough. That musky, wet fur stink never went away, even after the line was scrubbed. After the bleach burned our throats, the air still carried it. And late at night, when the plant was supposed to be locked down tight, we'd hear it, slow claws tapping against steel like something pacing just out of sight. Some of the crew quit. The ones who stayed stopped talking about it out loud, but I could see it in their faces. Every time the lights flickered, every time a chain swung without reason, they were remembering the same thing I was. Word spread through town. People said it might have been a wild animal that slipped inside, surviving on scraps, but others whispered different stories. Old ones about things that walk upright when they shouldn't, things that study people the way hunters study prey. I can't say for sure which one it was. All I know is it didn't feel like an accident. It didn't feel lost. It felt like it was already home, and we were the ones who didn't belong there. So I'll leave you with this. Was it warning us to stay out, or was it simply waiting for the right moment to claim what it wanted?